why minimal wellness is becoming more effective. The shift away from complicated health routines. For a long time, wellness started feeling increasingly complicated. More supplements, more tracking apps, more routines, more products, more optimization. Everywhere online, there seemed to be another morning system, another diet strategy, another list of things people were supposedly doing to become healthier. At first, it felt productive. But after a while, something strange started happening. People were becoming more informed, while also seeming more exhausted by wellness itself. That contradiction feels difficult to ignore once you notice it. Why simplicity started feeling more appealing again? Recently, there's been a noticeable shift towards simpler health habits. More walking instead of extreme workouts. More consistent sleep instead of endless productivity systems. More focus on basic food quality instead of constantly changing diets. This is interesting because the basics were never really replaced. They were just buried underneath layers of optimization for a while. And honestly, a lot of people seem mentally tired of treating every part of health like a performance project. A feeling that becomes familiar quickly. I've noticed this, especially online. Someone shares a wellness routine that involves dozens of steps, supplements, measurements, schedules, restrictions, and perfectly timed habits. At first, it looks impressive, but after a few minutes, it also starts looking exhausting. The routine itself almost becomes another source of stress. That raises a strange question. If a health routine constantly overwhelms someone mentally, how healthy is it actually becoming overall? Because wellness that creates constant psychological pressure eventually starts working against itself. Why consistency usually matters more than complexity. One thing that becomes clear over time is that simple habits repeated consistently often outperform complicated systems people cannot maintain. Walking daily for years probably matters more than extreme routines followed intensely for 2 weeks before quitting. Sleeping consistently matters more than constantly searching for perfect sleep hacks while staying mentally over. The body seems to respond more to stable patterns than dramatic short-term optimization. That part feels less exciting online, but probably more realistic in actual life. The problem with constant optimization, modern wellness culture sometimes treats the human body like a machine that always needs upgrading. There's always another improvement to chase. Better focus, better recovery, better metabolism, better productivity, better routines. But eventually, optimization itself becomes mentally exhausting. This is interesting because many people begin wellness routines hoping to reduce stress, then accidentally create entirely new forms of stress around health itself. Suddenly, every meal, sleep pattern, workout, and productivity habit feels like something that must be perfected constantly. That pressure builds quietly. Why simpler habits feel easier to sustain. Minimal wellness usually focuses on fewer variables. Sleep enough, move regularly, eat reasonably well most of the time, reduce constant overstimulation, go outside more often, stay consistent instead of extreme. None of those ideas sound revolutionary individually. That's probably why people underestimate them. But the simplicity makes them easier to sustain long-term. And sustainability matters more than intensity in most areas of health, especially because the body experiences repeated patterns every day, not isolated bursts of motivation. The relationship between wellness and mental bandwidth. One thing people rarely talk about enough is mental bandwidth. Every additional rule, tracker, restriction, or optimization habit requires attention. At some point, wellness routines stop reducing stress and start consuming cognitive space constantly. That's probably part of why simpler systems feel psychologically lighter. You stop thinking about health every second and start living more normally again. And ironically, that reduction in mental pressure sometimes improves health more than the complicated system itself. Why minimal wellness feels more human. Minimal wellness also feels more compatible with real life. School schedules, work, relationships, family responsibilities, stress, changing routines. Most people cannot realistically maintain highly optimized lifestyles forever. But walking more often, sleeping consistently, reducing overstress, and eating more balanced meals usually remain manageable. Even during stressful periods, that flexibility matters more than people realize. A system only works long-term if actual humans can realistically continue following it. The internet changed wellness expectations. Social media also changed how people think wellness is supposed to look. Highly aesthetic routines, expensive products, perfectly organized schedules, constantly self-improvement content. Sometimes wellness online feels less like health and more like identity performance. And after enough exposure to that environment, simplicity starts feeling strangely refreshing. Not because simple habits are trendy, but because people are mentally overloaded by constant optimization culture. Why the basics keep returning. There's a reason basic health advice keeps returning over and over again despite new trends constantly appearing. Sleep matters. Movement matters. Stress management matters. Food quality matters. Human physiology has not changed nearly as fast as wellness marketing has. This raises another question. How much of modern wellness complexity is actually necessary? And how much of it exists because complexity is easier to market? That question feels uncomfortable sometimes, because the wellness industry often benefits from making health feel endlessly complicated. The difference between effective and impressive. Some health routines look extremely impressive online, but are difficult to maintain privately. Minimal wellness often looks less exciting from the outside because the habits are simple and repetitive. But effectiveness and impressiveness are not always the same thing. That distinction becomes more obvious over time, especially when you notice how many people constantly restart complicated routines instead of quietly maintaining simple ones for years. Why burnout changed wellness culture. Part of this shift probably comes from burnout itself. Many people became exhausted trying to optimize every part of life simultaneously. Productivity systems, intense fitness goals, endless self-improvement content, constant tracking. Eventually, the pressure itself became unsustainable. So now there seems to be growing appreciation for systems that support health without completely consuming mental energy. That change feels important. The part that feels slightly ironic, the strange part is that wellness often becomes more effective once it stops dominating someone's entire life. When habits become simpler and more sustainable, they integrate into daily life more naturally instead of feeling like constant projects. That feels almost backwards at first, because people assume better results require more complexity. But sometimes removing friction matters more than adding optimization. Final thoughts. Minimal wellness is becoming more effective, partly because simpler habits are easier to sustain consistently over time. As people become mentally exhausted by constant optimization culture, there is growing recognition that basic patterns like sleep, movement, reduced overstimulation, and balanced routines still matter most. The body responds strongly to consistency, and consistency becomes easier when wellness stops feeling overwhelmingly complicated. Once you notice that, the shift towards simpler health systems starts making a lot more sense. Thanks for watching.